I don't like the term PTSD. I think we should drop the post. These children have witnessed violence that kids should not have to see. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome down the line. Thank you for joining us. I'm David Enders. I'm a host and producer here at Vice News. And today we'll be talking about a film we shot in January in a Syrian refugee camp in eastern Lebanon, as well as about the Syrian civil war and the refugee crisis it's created.
All right. Hey, David. Thanks for coming on the show today. So
Thanks.
we're excited to have you here, and I know there's a bunch of people on Skype who are excited to talk to you. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and say hey to Liam, who will be our first caller today. Hey, Liam.
Hi, David.
How's
Hi,
it
guys.
going?
It's good. How's it with you?
Great.
So, initial question. I'm curious about the employment of the refugees, given the restrictions on formal employment for refugees in Lebanon. What are they doing? How are they keeping afloat?
Well, we're into the fifth year of this war, and a lot of refugees are incurring debt. The money that they had saved when they left Syria is long since spent. Some of them are finding work in the local economy. The vast majority are having difficulties because they can't get legal permission to even have residency in Lebanon. So they risk arrest when they're leaving these refugee camps, which makes it very difficult for people to go out and work. You do find people working in factories during the nicer part of the year, working on farms. And another effect it's had is to upend the social structure for some of these families. We found a lot of women going to work for the first time in their lives because they're less likely to be arrested than men are, or stopped at checkpoints or harassed. But it's not necessarily a sustainable situation. Because of the war, the economy in eastern Lebanon in particular has taken some huge hits, and it's likely that it's going to be very hard for Lebanese to find jobs in the coming years, as well as the Syrians.
So, do you think that the solution to a lot of refugee problems might be to loosen the restrictions on formal employment, allow Syrian refugees to gain and maintain jobs in the country?
I don't know that is the solution. One thing that I've been covering refugee issues in the Middle East since 2003, when the U.S. invasion of Iraq created a huge wave of refugees, and that's smaller than the one we're seeing now with Syria and the fighting in Iraq. But in 2006, as the Iraqi refugee crisis was building, UNHCR officials, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, whose office is responsible for aid and resettlement, were saying very clearly that the only solution for this refugee problem, the Iraqi refugee problem, was permanent resettlement for many of these families. And this is a bigger refugee problem than the one that we had experienced until now with Iraq. And so I can't imagine that the answer is necessarily for all these people to stay in a country. For instance, Lebanon has a population of about 4.5, 5 million. There are a million Syrian refugees. The country has more refugees per capita than any other country in the world at this point, and it's a country that already suffered from severe economic issues, severe infrastructure issues, a lack of housing, especially affordable housing. So I don't see this many Syrians staying in Lebanon long term.
So, taking from what you've said regarding sort of international bodies commenting on how countries should deal with refugee crisis, you mentioned Iraq, and so there is international calls for Lebanon to think at least about allowing Syrian refugees to work more permanently in the country. Do you think that the reason for calls like that is is Europe and the rest of the world being altruistic and trying to make things easier in Lebanon, or is it hoping that any further refugee crisis will be directed towards Lebanon instead of, say, the Baltic route into Europe?
Well, so maybe one way to look at this is the way the Lebanese government looks at it. In May of last year, in order to discourage more people from arriving, the Lebanese government asked the UN to stop registering them. If they're not registered, they're not entitled to aid. They would be the kind of people who look at it and be, maybe I don't want to go there. So the Lebanese government doesn't want these people. So people outside Lebanon asking the Lebanese government to loosen employment restrictions is, frankly, a little bit ridiculous to me in a country that doesn't have enough jobs for its own citizens already. And because of the war in Syria, you have the country really taking some severe economic blows. In the Bekaa, which is where they grow a lot of produce, they also export produce to other parts of the Arab world. They can't do that now as effectively because the Syrian border is closed. You can drive overland from Syria. It's a major trucking route to the Gulf, to Jordan, to other parts of the Arab world. And these businesses are collapsing now because they can't afford to ship overseas to the Gulf, to their markets. It's too expensive. So I don't know how Lebanon sustains its own economy, let alone taking on 1 million Syrian workers. That's just not feasible.
Well, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great questions.
Yeah, man, thanks for coming on. So, hey, Dave, we got this good tweet from Mohammed Khalil on Twitter. Go figure, a tweet from Twitter. But Mohammed wants to know, what is the situation for schools and education for minors among the refugees that you met?
So, that's an important question. People talk about a lost generation, and Syrians are experiencing that. There are schools in some of the camps. Some of the Lebanese schools are admitting Syrians. I mean, in the sense of education, the Lebanese government, I think, has made a serious push to schools are running on 2 shifts in some places. They're doing what they can. You see some clips of a school in the camp in our film. There's an organization called Jasur Syria, Bridges, and they run schools in some of the camps. And it's difficult because if you can imagine, especially in the camp, as a teacher, you're dealing with kids who are coming out of really, really difficult situations. And if you think about urban American teachers complaining about the difficult situations in their classrooms, you can imagine when you have kids living in such difficult conditions. The one day we were filming in the school in January, a lot of the kids didn't stay. It was just too cold for them to actually be in the building. Some of them actually seemed to be there because it might have been better heated than the places they were living. So people are doing what they can, but they're not getting the same education they would get in a stable situation in Syria. And you also have families that are being forced to send school-age children to work because they just can't make ends meet.
We have a clip of that. Do you want to
We
watch
do
that?
have a clip of that. I think we should go to that if we can.
يعني عندك مدرسة اليوم؟
لا ما عنا مدرسة، ما في مدرسة أصلا.
ليش؟
إنه بروح الشغل وما في حدا يعاون أمي هون.
كم صار أنت شغل هون؟ كم شهر؟
كم شهر زمان. صرنا زمان.
سن قريب هون؟ بعيد من هون؟
لا بعيد، نروح مشي. حتى أحيانا نلاقي كلاب هونيك يلحقونا. كل الأيام ما أعطل. مرات يعطوا أنا ما أعطل.
سبت يوم بالأسبوع.
نحن صار بدنا نسوي مش منيح. أنا ما كنت مضطرة أشغل بنت. هي لازم تدرس.
So that girl's name is Nawal, and she's in Lebanon with her mother and her younger sister, and she goes every day to work in a diaper factory. She sorts diapers into packaging for 7 or 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. Her father disappeared 3 years ago in Syria, presumably arrested by the government, and they're doing what they can to survive, but they're not the only ones in that situation. And we didn't have to find examples of child labor, we didn't actually have to look. You're in these camps, you're talking to people, and and you just immediately have people coming up and telling you stories like this, and it was heartbreaking to listen to someone who was a 6th or 7th grader talk about going to work instead of going to school.
Jesus. Well, with that, let's go to Hassan, who's on Skype, and I'm sure he doesn't have anything much more cheery. So, Hassan, you want to go ahead and let us know what you have to ask?
Hey, David. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. So while I was watching the documentary, I noticed a lot of the folks that you were speaking with seemed to be very undeterred in terms of their devotion to their religion. I continuously heard inshallah, which is, God willing, and they seem to be very, very much devoted still. And so considering their hardships, it is rather fascinating. And also, do you see this pretty consistently throughout, or have you kind of seen different trends or throughout the area while you've been traveling there?
Actually, the way Syrians speak, Syrians, Iraqis, Gulfis particularly, inshallah, mashallah, salam alaikum is the standard greeting. You don't find that necessarily in for instance, Lebanon, but as you go further east, in particular Syria, Iraq, it's just a standard greeting. Christians, Muslims, Arabs, right? It's Arabic.
Right.
And it's not specific to one religion necessarily. We associate it with that. But as far as, it was interesting because we didn't have any conversations about religion. And you're talking, a lot of these people are from rural Syria, and where it's a part of life. It's integral to life, as opposed to something that people sort of move to at certain times or move away from. No one really addressed that. And
right.
What they didn't seem to have a lot of sympathy for was what has become the very militant sort of religious factions. But they also didn't express any support for the government. I mean, these people are trying to get away from all of that, really. They don't want to side. They don't want to fight. But it's interesting that you asked, because that didn't really come up.
Yeah. No, that is rather fascinating. I mean, I remember that one gentleman towards the end kept, kind of referring to it over and over again, saying that, God willing, we'll go back, which actually brings me to my next question. It seems rather unique with respect to like a refugee scenario, right? You have a lot of these types of situations that have taken place throughout history where people have been very much willing to leave and wanting to leave. I guess what I noticed was a lot of folks were saying they wanted to go back. So what is it unique to Syria that is, I guess, having these people wanting to go back to their countries as opposed to, somewhere in Europe or really anywhere else?
Well, imagine as a 40-year-old who has never lived outside of, the family, Jihad's family, the guy with the pigeons, they're from Idlib, okay? They're from rural northern Syria. I would guess Jihad probably didn't go any further than high school as far as formal education, if that. And can you imagine relocating to an entirely different society, one that you might have language? I mean, it's easier for kids. Kids learn languages like that. Adults, it's difficult. And I mean, you're talking about you got a large family to move. You still have family potentially in Syria. If you get political asylum in another country, you can't travel back. At least in the States, the rule is you can't go back for 5 years. I mean, emigration is extremely difficult. And especially, I think, as you get more toward these big families with people who are in their 30s and 40s and just can't even imagine, can't conceptualize of living outside of Syria. Or, I know lots of Lebanese people who aren't refugees. They don't want to live in the States. They like the food. They like their family. It's a different type of life. So I think and then seeing some of the reactions in the States, we don't want these people because we associate them with the Islamic State or with terrorists. You know, why would you want to subject yourself to that? They do want to go back. They want to be in their country.
Sure. Makes sense. Last thing, you know, I hear when you're watching the news, you hear a lot of pundits and analysts talking about who's to blame. From the people that you've been talking to, the Syrians, what is their perception of what's going on? Are they placing the blame on the government or or ISIS, or is it kind of like a hybrid of both? What are you hearing when you talk to these people?
At this point, it's they blame the war mostly. I mean, there are people with specific stories, right? I had to leave because this group controlled where I lived and didn't like me because of this. So there are specific, you know, situations. But at this point, most people are just they're fleeing violence and just the interruption of their normal lives. And it's less about blame than just trying to find some sort of solution. I think earlier on you found a lot of that blame, but I've heard, you know, the government has been a major driver of the violence, but you have lots of rebel factions in the Islamic State that's also, I mean, right now it's the Russians. If I'm from northern Syria and I'm displaced again, I'm probably blaming the Russian bombing, but then is that specific to them or the war?
Right.
So does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's obviously
more,
a very complex
I mean,
scenario.
even now, like in the past couple of years, I've heard people I know who were very supportive of the demonstrations against the government were out there at the forefront, and now they blame themselves. They say, we started this movement against the government. We started against a government that was never going to do anything but drag us into a war over this.
Wow.
And so some people wish they had never started it in the first place.
Oh, that's sad. Well,
It is.
oh, thank you. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
It's all the questions I have. Appreciate it.
All right. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Hassan. So, listen, Dave, we're going to go straight to our next Skype caller. This is Rowan. So let's go ahead and say hey to Rowan.
How's it going?
How's it going, Dave? So I wanted to shift from Syria a little bit back to Lebanon. And one of my biggest one of the most surprising things to me has been the Lebanese stability, the lack of violence, the lack of devolving into basically the same civil war that happened during the 80s. Did you see anything that kind of gave a reason for that, and kind of just a follow up to that? Like, do you see any evidence that is going to change in the near future?
I feel like our expectations of Lebanon are like so low.
Yeah.
People are always predicting that it's about to just like plunge off the edge of the cliff, chasm, abyss, whatever, anyway. Lebanese people have experienced a very horrible civil war. There are not a lot of people, I think, who are very excited about returning to a situation like that. You also have, at the moment, two of the major players in this proxy conflict. You have Iran, which is on the side of the Syrian government. You have Saudi Arabia, which has provided a lot of support for the rebel factions. And they both have interests and factions in Lebanon. And right now, they're choosing not to push violence. There have been sporadic outbreaks of violence. The Lebanese border also right now is virtually the only one that is held by the Syrian regime. What's held by the Syrian army in conjunction with Hezbollah, Syrian militia, and these groups, and the Lebanese army, which is receiving support from the U.S., which is always interesting to me. The Saudis have recently said they're going to pull out some of their promised aid for the Lebanese army. Now, this might be the start of a different tack as far as the way Saudi and Iran are looking at Lebanon. But I think you have a lot of people who just see no reason to return to that. And you also have people going over. You do have Lebanese fighting on both sides of the conflict inside Syria. So that's another way that the violence is actually moving from Lebanon into Syria. But we'll see if it does. It could eventually move. Dynamics can change. And we'll see what happens as people try to settle out what Syria will look like, whether it will be partitioned, and where people are going to go.
Yeah. So kind of building on that a little bit. Did you see any sorting? And you kind of answered this a little bit, but in Lebanon, did you see any sorting of refugees? And what I mean by that is Christians going to Christian communities, Shia going to Shia communities, et cetera, et cetera.
You do have, and this is Lebanon after the war, is a series of enclaves.
Yeah.
And you do have, it's normal, I guess, at this point in this area for people to identify with co-religionists. And the camp we were in is virtually all Sunnah families, and they're in a Sunnah city in Lebanon that is sympathetic to the rebel movement inside Syria, most definitely. The Syrian army occupied Lebanon for a long time. There are lots of reasons why lots of Lebanese don't like the Syrian government. On the other hand, I've seen lots of examples of pro-government pro-rebel Syrian Sunnis living in Hezbollah-controlled areas and receiving aid, and even feeling bold enough to announce their support for the rebels in the presence of Hezbollah members, which was so. And I've seen, Muslims fleeing to Christian areas in the north. I mean, refugees are refugees, and they will often end up in a particular place, but I haven't really seen examples. There have been some accusations of Hezbollah burning down refugee camps, and there will be sporadic outbreaks of violence, but by and large, people are being treated pretty well in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and just last one. You kind of went into how the situation for children, especially in schools, and you compared it to the situation in urban schools in the U.S. and there's been a few studies recently about how it's basically PTSD that these kids are going through in urban schools in the U.S. I just wanted to ask you kind of to expand on the trauma that these kids are going through.
I don't like the term PTSD. I think we should drop the post. Because for a lot of these people,
current CTSD. Yeah.
And so Nawal, for instance, 12 years old, her father, they were a little bit. You notice we had to blur her mother's face. She had concerns for family still in Syria, for eventually returning to Syria. But it was pretty clear that he had been disappeared by the government and most likely killed, and they hadn't seen him in 3 years. So that's, and at this point, I mean, people don't uproot themselves like this, and especially rural people, right? These people are leaving, what they have is their houses, their land, they might graze, they might, right? And so they're screwed, they're uprooted. So they are fleeing traumas, they are fleeing the deaths of relatives, the destruction of their homes. I mean, if you've ever been, under shell fire, that is a terrifying, terrifying experience. So you have an entire population that's, an entire country at this point that's traumatized. And so, these children have witnessed violence that kids should not have to see.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. So, hey, Dave, we got a tweet from Woody. It's actually 2 tweets, so I'm going to do my best to summarize this. Woody wants to know, ISIS's activity in the region has really changed what it means to be a fundamentalist fighter and the way people view refugees, especially people in the West. So Woody wants to know, is there any hope that refugees from Syria and North Africa, all over the place, can do some beating back of this identity crisis and get over the label that many Westerners are applying to Muslim refugees as terrorists? What are your thoughts?
Why is it their job to change the way we think about them? Anyway, that's my first thought. One thing that I don't think people get is that there is a very robust settlement process in place. America, for instance, since the 90s, has let in tens of thousands of Yemenis. We've let in tens of thousands of Iraqis since 2003. And none of these people have committed terrorist attacks in America. And if you think about Iraqis, whose country we invaded and helped destroy, a lot of them might have a reason to be angry, and you haven't had that. And when you have this risk of refugee populations being infiltrated by people with ill will, it's only a problem when you have these massive buildups and then people crashing into Europe without vetting being able to be done, without people's identities being able to be checked. And our lack of having a formal process to deal with these refugees at first, when we watched this crisis building and it's incrementally reached this level, there was certainly a lot of warning about this. Initially, we saw them breaking down the border gates to get into Turkey. It was a matter of time before they would be rushing further on, before these neighboring countries couldn't handle any more people. And so based on the numbers, you're not talking about a population that is, terrorists or part of the Islamic State. We actually have a clip that addresses this, if we could go to that. It's actually, we were talking with one of the residents of Al-Marj who's renting space to 7 different refugee families. And he himself, as a Lebanese person during the Civil War, spent 20 years as a refugee in the States. So he's thinking about his experience and talking about the Syrian refugees in Al-Marj, who I would also point out have carried out 0 terrorist attacks.
What can I say? I mean, these poor people right here, they have barely enough to eat or barely enough to warm themselves. Those are not terrorists. They are just normal people who ran away from bombing and killing, and some of them lost family members. And they're here just trying to live, that's all. It's a burden on this community. It's a burden on Marj, burden for water, for food, and everything else. I don't think I can do it. And even though I was, at a point, one of refugee in the state, and I don't know how they can do it. They're living really tough.
Also, it might just be worth pointing out that I'm an American, and, I don't feel unsafe in these situations. I've spent a lot of time in Syria. I've even spent time around the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda affiliated movements. I think what we're seeing is magnified by news coverage and by social media, and we need to be careful not to, I think as Americans, we wouldn't want certain stereotypes to be applied to all of us.
Yeah.
A couple more Skype questions?
Yeah, we do. We got one more guy on Skype, and I know we have some people tweeting in, but without any further ado, let's go ahead and say hey to Osama. Osama, you there?
Hello. Yes. Hello. Hi, Dave.
How's it going?
Yeah, good. How about you?
Great. I'm almost out of coffee, though.
I don't have mine, but it's all good. To resolve the current Syrian refugee crisis, I mean, no matter how much aid, money, or food or whatever comes into Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, or Syria, it won't be resolved unless the political issue is resolved. And of course, that's going to take a lot of time. As you mentioned, you've got Iran and Hezbollah, Russia with Bashar al-Assad. You've got Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries with Jordan and Turkey, or helping the rebels through Jordan and Turkey as well. You've got the Kurds who want to create a state. You've got ISIS on another side, and the Syrians just left like, what the hell is happening? So what do you think, or what do the refugees think will solve this whole problem? Is it going to take to wait for a genocide like 1995 in Srebrenica in Bosnia to happen for the world to wake up and do something about it?
I don't like to predict, especially with situations like this. I had spent a lot of time in Syria in the decade preceding this war, and about the only thing I was willing to predict was that when those demonstrations against the government started, we would either see that the Syrian government was very, very weak and it would be gone in a matter of weeks, or the way this government operates and deals with dissent is that you use the hammer, and they've brought it down. So it's really hard to say this will go on for another year, another 5 years, another 10 years. And I don't know what this looks like. I think we're sort of, to some extent, in uncharted territory. I think it's worth looking at like the last time borders were redrawn in the Middle East 100 years ago, and I think we're dealing with something that is more like that than anything, you know, we've seen in the region in your lifetime or my lifetime.
Okay. But for example, the Syrian refugees who've went to Europe and have settled, let's say in Germany, where there are a lot, and they're studying now and having jobs and everything. But there are a few, or the most actually, in Jordan, Lebanon, who are living the situation that you have been filming recently. And for example, that guy at the end of the video is saying that we don't want to exile from one place to another. And they didn't even expect to live there for 5 years. What is going through their minds? I mean, I know that the most they care about is to get the food for that single day, but politically what they're thinking about, what is going to happen? I mean, not to forget that the history of Syria and Sunnis versus Alawiyin since 1982 and even before that.
Well,
what goes to their minds?
That, and that conflict in 82 was part of what drove this conflict. There were hundreds of thousands of people put into exile, and in some cases it's their children coming back from the Gulf who helped drive this rebel movement. But I mean, I guess as far as where these people go, there's still 500,000 Palestinians in Lebanon. There were more than that in Syria. I mean, just imagine the Palestinians who are driven out of Syria. These people were already stateless, effectively, and now they're stateless again in another, in some of them in Lebanon, where, you know, they're not really particularly wanted anyway. I mean, that's a crisis that we haven't, that 60 years later is unresolved, and that is a refugee crisis that has spanned generations. And most of these people will not be accepted into other countries. A lot of these people probably will not be able to go back into Syria. So it's hard to say. I mean, the Lebanese government is making a concerted effort to avoid camps becoming large and permanent the way they did with the Palestinians, but nobody has a solution, and no one's offering solutions, I think, is maybe the answer to your question, and no one knows.
So why are those people in Lebanon staying? What are they expecting? They already knowing the situation of Lebanon.
Back. Those people, Jihad's family, they don't have a house in Syria anymore. Abu Dahor has been destroyed like 4 times in the last 2 years. There's a military airport there, and it's been overrun by different factions in the past couple years over and over again. Right now, they can't go back.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I guess that's what I have. I know it's overcomplicated, man. It's just what most interested me is just like, why are those people even staying there, you know, and saying like that sentence, being exiled to an exile. Well, there is a better situation. Isn't there a way to just? And there's millions of them now.
Also, those young men, they have the lowest priority in resettlement. Generally, resettlement priorities in other countries are families like Nawal's, where there is no man, there's a single woman and children. Elderly people, sick people get resettlement priorities. So when you see those guys selling, you know, with the pigeons at the end, talking about like not wanting to leave, their chance of actually being resettled is almost zero anyway.
Especially due to the
so they just don't know where to go. They can't. I mean, those 3 guys were from Baba Amr, right? Where one of the places where the rebellion essentially began, and the first place where they really took up arms. Those guys can't go back to any part of the country that is held by the Syrian government. And if they don't want to live in a place controlled by one of these very conservative factions, then they're really running out of options right there.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Dave. That's all I have to ask.
Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Do we have time for one last clip?
We've got time for one last clip. What do you want to watch?
If we could just see the end of our time with Nawal. The little girl
let's do that on the way out of the show. You know, Dave, I think with that, what a perfect place to wrap up. Do you want to thank everybody at home who's watching?
I would love to. Thank you for joining us. I hope you learned something. Obviously, this is going to be a problem that's going to be with us for some time.
أنت مشتاق لك مدرسة؟
كتير مو شوي. يا ريت فينا نرجع المدرسة للبيت. نحن بيتنا كان طابقين. نحن وبيت عمي 2 قاعدين في البيت. كنا نطلع لعنده وننزل لعبنا وكنا نلعب. كنا كل نهار نمضيها لعب. قول يا ريت فينا نرجع نرجع صغار.